Oh, I didn't see you there. Hi, I'm world-renowned cognitive molecular neurogeneticist Ryan Conrad from the University of California in Ohio. Over the past 3 decades, scientists have been experimenting with the genetic modification of organisms, from producing plants resistant to antibiotics to tomatoes with delayed ripening patterns. Genetically modified organisms, however, now make up a large percentage of our food supply, meaning that at least a portion of what you eat every day comes from a genetically modified plant or animal. Should this be of any concern to us? We're not sure. But over this 27.5-part miniseries, I'll be giving you a brief overview of this fascinating, relevant, and recent issue. Let's get sciencey. What is genetically modified food? Well, this umbrella term covers any source of nutrition drawn from a genetically modified organism, or GMO. A GMO is any organism whose genetic material has been altered in some way, typically through genetic engineering. This is a much broader topic than GM food itself, because many genetically modified organisms are used in ways other than for food. For example, glowing fish are often sold as pets, and this genetic variation has actually been patented by a company. But how are these organisms produced? Surely the term genetic modification implies a stage of human intervention. Unfortunately, this process cannot be sufficiently explained with anything short of a small textbook, but I'll do my best to give you a quick rundown. Let's say you would like to make a strain of corn that was more tolerant of herbicides. First, you would need to locate and isolate the gene responsible for this trait. Often, another organism with DNA segments able to express this trait is used as a donor, and a small tissue sample from said organism can be extracted in order to access the genes. Enzymes would then be used to break apart the DNA and isolate the portion you want to use in this corn. In the third step, you would prepare the gene for insertion. Other genetic materials would have to be added in order for the gene to successfully bind with the rest of the DNA sequence, and the whole package could then be manipulated into place within a plasmid, a small molecule associated with horizontal gene transfer. Two of the most common methods of gene transfer include attaching the DNA to a virus, which can penetrate the cell membrane, or simply using a minuscule syringe to inject the genetic material into the nucleus. Following this process is the typical life cycle of corn, which would mature with an increased tolerance of herbicides and would give you a better yield. Remember that this is just one way organisms are genetically modified. They are manipulated as a single cell or string of DNA and are left to grow into altered organisms. Of course, the reason we're here is to look at how genetic engineering affects our food supply. Well, at the current time, only GM crops are FDA approved for use in food consumption, although GM fish are quickly climbing the legal rungs, and we might soon be seeing modified species such as salmon hitting the markets. You might not think that these GM foods can really have any impact on you, and that may be because you think you've never eaten something from a genetically modified organism. Well, if you've ever eaten anything with cottonseed, rapeseed, or canola oil in it, including margarine and potato chips, or eaten anything with soy in it, including ice cream, cereal, and chocolate, or eaten anything containing or consisting of corn, squash, tomatoes, or potatoes, it's almost impossible for you to have never ingested a genetically modified food. If that's not good enough for you, also take into account the fact that most livestock feed is made up of GM soy, rapeseed, or corn, meaning that eating anything from pork chops to yogurt leads to the high possibility of running into GM products. The short of the matter, GM food is everywhere, meaning that anything that arises because of it affects everybody. Before we discuss the downsides of this booming genetic industry, it should be noted that GM foods have their benefits. Being able to manipulate the basic code of what we eat can result in enhanced taste, reduced maturation time, increased nutrients, increased resistance to disease and other threats, better natural waste management, and a more reliable source of food. This list goes on for a while. The point is that GMOs are providing us with better tasting, easier to produce food, and in larger quantities, the latter of which is of the highest importance to us. Developing countries especially are in a larger need of mass reliable food sources with which to feed their burgeoning populations, and pest-resistant crops are surely an example of a positive growth of food production in these nations. Unfortunately, not every example of this new technology is as beneficiary to us. Most people today are concerned by the thought of genetically modified foods, and that's largely because they don't know enough about them. However, issues beyond lack of knowledge arise upon a deeper understanding of GMOs. Health and safety risks, such as the transfer of antibiotic resistance markers to humans, are very real, and can cause diseases otherwise treatable with simple antibiotics to become dangerous and potentially fatal. Ethical questions are less questionable and more debatable, and what that means is that while health risks are still awaiting conclusive scientific evidence, ethical questions are ones that we can ask ourselves right now without waiting for science to catch up. Concerns arise regarding tampering with nature and disturbing intrinsic values, allowing food production to become dominated by a few companies, forcing developing countries to rely more and more on the first world nations, and consuming animal genes contained within plant products. Another huge problem, which some may not describe as a problem, is the labeling of GM food products as such. Should these genetically engineered ears of corn and samples of soy be specifically labeled in Canada and around the world? Should regulations be placed upon GM food as if it were any other food source, or as if it was a laboratory experiment with no proven standards of safety? To give you an extremely brief bit of background information, countries like Australia, China, and the nations of the European Union all require foods that have been genetically modified to be labeled so that people can tell the difference between GM and non-GM food products. Canada is not one of these nations. The question here, should it be? Economists and company representatives, as well as scientists from prominent universities, have all pointed out that labeling foods as being genetically modified might drive consumers away from these products and result in an increase in regular food prices to meet higher demand. The fact of the matter is that GMOs are quicker and cheaper to make than ordinary crops, meaning that buyers are paying less for a more bountiful supply of these products. Testing these foods and implementing a system of segregation would only drive up the costs. There's also a societal effect to labeling these foods. The aesthetics of GM food labels can be skewed towards a particular side, turning these tips for consumer awareness into frightening warning labels. Because there isn't any conclusive proof that GM products are any more harmful than regular foods, this may be unfairly turning customers away from genetically engineered alternatives. What do you think? Should all GM foods be strictly monitored and labeled so that people know what's in their food? Or should costs be kept reasonable and health warnings be avoided as no detectable differences between GM and regular products have been found? As with the processes involved in making GMOs, the questions raised by GM food as a result of their ethics and safety cannot be easily simplified from their true form. The most important thing that we can do is keep asking these questions. GMOs are still a relatively new field of genetics and require a much higher level of testing and a much broader scale before we can be assured of their benefits and not worried about their disadvantages. The labeling debate is one that will continue until this research can come up with more conclusive evidence, but it's one that you can become involved with. If you'd like to know more about food labeling in Canada, check out the Canadian Food Inspection Agency online at www.inspection.gc.ca, or contact your MP and give some input regarding your opinion on this global issue. Thank you for learning with me. I hope you've gained a better understanding of this monumental topic and why it's important to us today. Just for fun, raid your pantry or refrigerator and see if you can find anything with voluntary GM labeling on it. If you can't, at least try to find something with, say, corn syrup or canola oil in it. There's a good chance you're eating food with genetically modified material in it, and if you're not sure what to think about that, do some research. You might be surprised by what you see.